The Quest. Daniel Yergin is the author. He won a Pulitzer for his last book, The Prize. Mr. Yergin, thank you for being with us here on BookTV.
It's great to be here.
And we're trying something different this year, and we have a guest interviewer, and now we have an expert. If you've ever watched our Afterwards show, you know how this goes. We bring an expert along to interview an author, and we're pleased to be joined by Steve Mufson of the Washington Post, the energy reporter. Mr. Mufson, it's your show, by the way, and you'll see the numbers up on the screen if you would like to dial in and talk with Daniel Yergin as the show goes on. Mr. Mufson.
Thanks. Good to be here. And good to be here with Dan, who I've known since 1979 when I was an intern at the Wall Street Journal covering oil and gas, like a lot of interns that year during the long gasoline lines. And knowing Dan has been great. I'm covering energy again now for the Washington Post. And there are very few people who, like Dan, can really help frame a lot of the big issues in energy and who can tell the narrative of what's really happened. I think that's part of what makes him unusual. And also he has this sort of holistic approach. There are a lot of energy books out there. People often ask me what kind of book to read, and not that many of them are covering all the geopolitics and in a broad way like Dan is. But there are a couple of questions I wanted to ask. One, a kind of relatively simple one about the book, because I know originally you were interested in history and you wrote your first book was actually about the Cold War. What kind of drew you into the energy issue and has kept you in the energy issue for 30 some odd years as opposed to doing something different?
I think what I discovered about energy is that it kind of includes everything, because it goes from geopolitics to economics to the way we live our lives to technology. And so it's an always changing story, and it has this whole framework of tying all these different things together and then, as you said, trying to find a story to convey it.
So one thing that interests me, and you were just talking about this in the other tent here at the festival, is that you think of yourself as an optimist about the future of energy, that you believe that technology will solve a lot of problems about energy shortages, and that maybe there isn't the kind of energy shortage people often worry about. And I was just wondering whether you could put that in some perspective, because it seems to me sometimes there's a lot of talk now about energy independence, about how the country can be energy independent, and a lot of politicians and drillers who seem to be saying we really don't have anything to worry about if only we would just drill everything.
Right.
What's the limit to your optimism, or isn't there any?
Well, I think there are a lot of things to worry about, and I would say optimistic but realistic at the same time. There are an enormous number of challengers. There are things that can go wrong. We can look right today and see some of these really big risks that are out there. So I wanted to make that clear. The optimism side of it is that when you just look at this whole unfolding history, you see that technology really does respond to challenges. Obviously, one question is, will the technological answers be there in time to meet the specific challenges? And, we've seen this big surprise in the last 3 or 4 years. And last time we had a presidential election, we're going to run out of energy. Now we actually have a surplus of energy. So these things do change. But as I said, I want to be realistic about it too. And I really want readers to understand what the real risks are.
So do you actually believe the United States can be energy independent?
No, I don't think so. Well, let me put it this way.
And mostly we're talking about oil independence.
Yeah, because it's really, when people say energy independence, going all the way back to Richard Nixon, it's really been about oil independence. And I think we've turned the corner, but we're still, as a share of our total oil, importing more than we did during the time of Richard Nixon. So, but I think we have the opportunity to be a lot less dependent. And if you tie it together with Canada and elsewhere in the Western Hemisphere, I think we could see a Western Hemisphere that isn't necessarily in 5 or 10 years importing much oil from the Eastern Hemisphere. That's a big change. And I think even we'll feel we're more resilient. We will be more resilient. And we'll get the economic benefits of development in our country. But I think it's a little too soon to actually proclaim the imminence of oil independence.
Well, and you mentioned this issue about the Western Hemisphere becoming more independent, but this is another issue that I've think is challenging, because it seems to me as long as there's 17 million barrels a day of oil flowing through the Strait of Hormuz, isn't that going to be a red line for us in terms of geopolitical strategy? We're not going to let Japan and Europe,
I think
if they're buying oil from that area.
Gone to, as it is, we only get about 12% of our total oil from the Persian Gulf as it is today. China gets more oil. And it's kind of one of the questions I really leave on the table. How in 5 or 10 years will the strategic balance change? But I think it is, that region is still going to be central to the world economy and central to the countries that we're most closely involved in. And so I think that there is a strategic interest which is greater than whether a barrel has an American flag on it or not.
And here is the cover of the book. It is called The Quest. Daniel Yergin won the Pulitzer for his last book on energy called The Prize. 202 is the area code, 585-3885. If you live in the East and Central time zones, 585-3886. For those of you in the Mountain and Pacific time zones, Steve Mufson of the Washington Post, the energy reporter, is also with us live at the National Book Festival. The first call for our guest, Daniel Yergin, comes from Russell in Delmont, Pennsylvania. Russell, you're on BookTV on C-SPAN 2. Please go ahead.
Well, hello. I'm happy to speak to you. This past week, I saw a line on NBC television which said that a study by a major university indicated that there was a possibility of powering the entire east coast of the United States with windmills located out in the ocean. I think it was Stanford Research Institute, but I'm not sure the exact quote. Something like this seemed preposterous 5 or 10 years ago, but now, why isn't that a possibility? And would that make a big dent in our oil needs?
The question is about offshore wind. If you go to Europe, Germany particularly, Denmark, UK, people are building offshore winds. I think it's still early in terms of development to know how resilient wind will be in that harsher environment. It's also expensive. It's about 2 or 3 times more expensive than onshore wind. So I would say we'll see people starting to do offshore wind development, but before it's a big share of our electricity, I think it'll be some number of years and really have to pass through to show that over a period of time that you can that it could survive the weather and the elements.
Next call comes from Jerry in Brookland, Arkansas. Jerry, please go ahead with your question or comment.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure and honor to speak with Mr. Yergin.
Thank you.
I read your prize and saw the PBS documentary based on it, and I thought it was very insightful. It really, your academic depth and scholarship is remarkable.
Thank you.
My concern with your current book, The Quest, I haven't read it. I will.
Good.
But I was
Thank you.
concerned. I was concerned that there's not a, if it were the vision, the vision, the quest I know is for profit, but is there a vision? Is there something to do in these guys, these multinational oil companies' minds as they've polluted the Gulf, they're drilling in the Arctic, the next big boondoggle, I guess, and maybe greater catastrophe environmentally? Did they have any concept of a vision for humanity, for the oceans? Anyhow, you understand what I'm saying.
All right, we
Well,
got
I
the question.
think that obviously the Macondo accident that you referred to was a really terrible thing, and it really, was kind of transfixed the nation for months. But I think, obviously these are companies that are in business and responsive to their shareholders. I would suppose if you're saying what's the real vision, and it's, I think, for everybody who's in the energy business, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's solar or wind, it's really how do you meet the needs of a growing economy? We see people around the world who were very poor, who are no longer poor, rising standards of income, and with that goes rising energy. And how to meet the needs of a growing world, I think, is the kind of fundamental question that faces everybody in the energy business. And it's kind of like a horse race between conventional energy, new energy. Who can meet it in terms of on an economic competitive basis on a large scale?
Next question
Well,
from Steve Mufson.
I mean, of course, we talk about the economic basis a lot, but one thing, and this is one of the things I liked about the new book, is you start to think about the whole climate and environmental